Two. Hey everyone, thanks for joining another PatchChat here. I'm with Jen Razi-Thomas, school committee member. Jen, how you doing?
Good, Mike. How are you?
It's great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for talking a bit. We had Jen Gregoritis on last week, and I'm thinking there's at least 3 or 4 more Jens elected officials that I can run through before we move on to anyone else. So Jen McAndrew needs to watch her back. I'm coming for her next.
All right. Our
So
newest chair.
yeah, absolutely. I thought got us out of there in just about 2 hours and 20 minutes the other night. And I thought that was an improvement over poor Ed. We love Ed. So, hey, so Jen, thanks for talking to us. I'm obviously in my toddler's room here in a rocking chair. So if everyone gives me some mercy on that, working from home in COVID. Jen, tell us about who you are, what you do in your day life, what you do on the school committee.
Okay. Well, thank you for this time, Mike. I'm excited to talk with you and for people to get to know me a little better. This is my office. I work in Salem at New Liberty Innovation School, and we are a competency-based high school, little teeny tiny school, 55 students or so. We've had time in person since September here, and it's been an interesting challenge to think about how to return safely in small groups and also enjoy all the culture that Salem offers before it got busy in October. So I'm a clinical social worker. I'm also on the leadership team here at my school. Worked here for 9 years, and I live in Melrose, of course, with my wife and 2 kids. Our children are in the Roosevelt School, Kaylin and Claire. Kaylin is 11 and in 5th grade, and Claire is 8 and in 3rd grade.
So you're on the school committee, obviously, and how long have you been on the school committee? And then tell us what it is to be on the school committee. What does that mean for, if I'm just an average person in Melrose who maybe doesn't watch meetings and stuff, or maybe I do have a kid, maybe I don't. What do you do on the school committee that might impact my life?
So I'm in my 3rd year, so I'm still a rookie. I'm in my 1st term. And of course, like everyone else, I had no idea what was going to happen in the last 3 years. And in the last 3 years, even before the pandemic, we have had 3 mayors, we've had 1 override, and we've had 2 superintendents. So it's been a very, very exciting time to be on the school committee. And I'm really proud of being on the school committee. But basically what you do is you try to anticipate what's going to happen next, which has been very difficult, right? This particular cycle since last March. But really you're responsible for overseeing the superintendent. So you're not responsible for the daily operations, but you're overseeing things. So that's particularly important with the budget. We sign off on warrants usually in our meetings, which is basically like how everyone gets paid and where the money gets dispersed to. So you look at those every time you have a warrant in front of you, and it's a line by line item. And then, so that's the finance piece. You're also responsible for the facility side, even though that in Melrose, it's shared with the Department of Public Works, because we've had this partnership for many years now where they help us with our facilities and the grounds, and it saves a lot of money to have both of those organizations together. So finances, facilities, policy, and planning, and then really oversight of the superintendent. So we don't hire anyone other than the superintendent. The superintendent's really in charge of everything, but we kind of help her plan and oversee things. So as you can imagine, this year has been different because we've had to also decide on how to return to instruction. Well, the other huge piece that I didn't mention is that the school committee does some of the bargaining with the teachers for the teachers union. So while I haven't been actively involved in bargaining, you're kept in the loop around that. You have to approve the agreements, the understandings in the contracts, and kind of keep the relationship going with the teachers. So that's a bit of it. And we meet every other week or so, like it's every 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks a month. It's on the second, usually our meetings are on Tuesdays, the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of the month.
It's funny, I'm sure a lot of students don't watch your meetings. I probably count them on one hand in Melrose who watch the school committee meetings. But when I'm watching, it's like, man, if you guys are making a lot of decisions that trickle down and are eventually going to impact these kids in kind of in their daily like school life. And it's really interesting. I know you guys go through the handbook, you guys go through all these, and obviously, you know, however you decide to move forward with a superintendent, that's going to impact, you know, how the principals are, you know, the principal and the teacher. It's just this trickle down effect to the students, and it's really interesting stuff. There's never a wasted moment in any of these government town meetings, school committee meetings that won't impact someone. Especially now, you guys are. When I was talking to Counselor Gregoritis the other day, you know, I don't want to say that you guys didn't sign up for this, but you guys are making decisions that are so much more, maybe beyond the scope than you thought you might when you signed up for it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you talk about kind of the process of doing the job now as opposed to the last 2 years? And we know that the override was a big talking point. We know that it was very important, and it's something that people could tangibly kind of grab and have opinions on. But there's nothing that can prepare you for what you're going through now, I'm sure. Can you just talk about what you're going through now in the pandemic and on the school committee?
Yeah, I think the thing that's prepared me the most is the fact that I work in a school and I'm on a leadership team at a school. And while I'm not making any decisions for the district of Salem, we're thinking about it all the time. And so this whole summer, when we were, you know, so parallel process, here I am working at my job. You know, I don't work full time in the summer, but I do some planning for the coming year. And so we're thinking of like, how are we going to return? How can it be done safely? What are the protocols we have to follow? And then at the same time, going into school committee meetings. Okay, so are we going to be remote? Are we going to be in person? Are we going to be hybrid? Blah, 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 blah. So it just helps me that I'm in it in my work. And my wife, Andrea, also works at Arlington High School. So she's thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. We're reading about it. You know, we know what March to June was like for us personally, professionally, and for our children, right? I know what high risk youth need because that's who I work with. I know what my kids need. I know what the community needs too. Like I'm not out of touch with people in Melrose, but like when you're making decisions about returning to instruction and what you're going to put teachers through, because the risk is not so high for young kids. The risk, except if you have medical issues, the risk is higher for people like me in my 50s than it is for kids who are, you know, 5 to 20, right? Let's say. So I just knew in my heart of hearts that I'm going back. I know I need to go back for my students. I believe we're essential workers. So that vote in August, as much as it was painful for the whole committee because we're usually on each right, very united, for me it was an easy vote of like, we're absolutely going back. We have to go back as much as possible. So even though that, you know, we had the month of remote learning, I think in some ways that worked out well for the teachers to understand how to provide the remote instruction better. They got more time to plan. It's not like I'm thinking that anyone was making a bad decision. That just wasn't the right decision based on what I thought was the right thing to do. So, yeah, so we're thinking about things like life or death. That's pretty different, right? Because there's teachers and there's certainly unions saying, we can't open the schools. It's too risky. It's too risky. But I feel fortunate because I understood that from the inside out, as well as from the outside in. And that's just makes you better informed, I think. Not that I think the whole committee is very well informed, but for me, it's always about what's the ethical thing to do, what's the right thing to do for the human beings. And I'm worried for the teachers now with the surge and everything. It's not that I'm not worried, but I'm getting tested every week. I know what it's like to go into a school. And so I feel like I'm walking the walk and I can live with my votes, you know? So.
Well, so it sounds like you're not asking anyone to do anything that you wouldn't be doing, obviously,
right.
as you zoom in here from your classroom. I wonder, you know, obviously, I'm sure whether you're on Facebook or you're on Twitter or you just get emails, which I'm sure you guys do all the time, and you really can't remove yourself from that like you can from Facebook or something. I'm sure you've heard a lot of feedback, positive and negative, over the last few months. And is it harder to do the job under this microscope now of every single person has this voice, wants to yell at you, wants to compliment, like whatever it is? I mean, is it just harder to do the job now that everyone is saying, what is Jen Razi-Thomas and the other 6 or 7 members, whatever it is, of the school committee, what are they doing with my children? You know, and people are so, and I know from experience, people are so quick and happy to criticize. talk about kind of working under the public eye and the microscope right now.
Well, I feel like overall, and this isn't true for every single moment, but almost to a person, like everyone's incredibly respectful and thankful because they don't want to be making these decisions. And most people will just say that, like, better you than me, right? So most of the time, people are grateful, even if they disagree with you. And I feel like the civic engagement in Melrose is remarkable, and people love the city. And even when they're mad, and then they get over it. Even and they can, like, and I'm also pretty thick-skinned. I played rugby for a million years. That's really what's prepared me well for the school committee. And I think that it's really COVID rage, right? So I was saying to this to you, Mike, before we started taping, but like, it's really like people are just fed up. They're fed up with the ground underneath them continuing to shift, things being uncertain. We don't know how long this is going to be. We could have, should have planned better. And some of it is fair criticism. So like, I just want people to remember that no one has done this before, and we're all learning as we go, and it's not as well planned as we would like. And we don't mean to disrupt things further. We're trying to make good decisions. And sometimes things are shifting, like the DESE thing of changing 35 hours of synchronous learning, and you have to roll this out by January 19th. That was just wrong, on top of everything else they're mandating. Like, let the teachers be and keep working on getting better at what they're doing, because all of this is new. So I feel for everybody, like in terms of, it's a hard year for everybody, the kids, the teachers, and the families. So I just remember, I know, and it's COVID rage. I don't take it personally.
Well, that's really good advice for everyone who is dealing with, like you said, the constant kind of changes. And I know there's been meetings that have gone on to 1 a.m, and there's been a big vote or two happening at past midnight. That's going to impact people, or with the going remote at kind of the last second. This last a couple weeks ago, it is good to remember, I think, that you guys and the superintendent and the mayor and people are just trying to do what's best for the kids, I think. And people have different ways of coming at that, but no one's trying to, ruin anyone's life. And I think it's important to remember that. Before you get too far away from the rugby thing, I heard a whisper now you're a national champion.
No, I was the assistant coach for Boston College Women's Rugby Club when they won national championship.
That's the national champion.
Yeah, 1993.
Wow.
I
was 4 years old at that point. So I want to ask, I want to be careful the way I phrase this. I think I was talking to you about this beforehand, and Councilor Gregoritis the previous week. Do you ever feel you're making decisions like you guys just made on testing, on spending $250,000 on coronavirus testing during a pandemic?
Yep.
The superintendent is putting together these plans for testing in the pandemic. You guys are approving them. She just brought over last Tuesday, a couple nights ago, 3 different plans for pandemic testing. Yep. For all the education and the everything you guys do, I don't know how many epidemiologists there are on the school committee board. Do you guys ever feel certainly not underqualified to make these things, but just misqualified to make some of these choices? Or what's the feeling when you're thinking, man, and you have to make them, you're the people making these decisions, but do you ever feel any sort of, man, I don't know right now, I'm choosing between this kind of viral testing and this PC, like, who knows, How do you kind of reconcile not being an epidemiologist and deciding some of these things, which you have to do?
This is where my own professional experience helps. I'm not an epidemiologist, but like at my school, I'm doing the Miramis testing every week, which is the saliva testing, which you collect yourself and then you pass it into your nurse. And just knowing that has been, I've gone through other types of testing too. So I've done the nasal testing, and so like, I feel like they're all PCR testing. So I'm more of a big picture person who narrows it down to details. I'm not like, I have to know the details first. I do the other way. And so for me, having the life experience of going through different types of testing, knowing what's doable in schools is really important, right? What can you sustain over time? I asked a question about that. Obviously we care about the money, but we've funded it. So it's there. And I I'm having trouble trusting the state because of the amazing number of changes that DESE has made over a very short period of time. So I wasn't planning on approving testing and worrying about a coronavirus pandemic, but this is where we are. And I'm a decisive person, so I weigh it, I think about it. If I have personal experience, I apply it, and I want the teachers to feel comfortable going to school every day, that they're in person. And I care about the kids extremely, very, very much. But honestly, the risk is not so much to the students as it is to the staff. So for me, it's like, it's kind of like a decision tree. I mean, you just narrow it down, which, so that's not that scientific, but it's more experiential.
How do you think the teachers are handling it right now, dealing with it? I'm sure that there's high anxieties. I know there's been some words thrown, not really back and forth, but I guess there's been some statements made and all that. But people are feeling anxious and they're worried, but how do you think they're doing?
Oh, I think the teachers are rising to the challenge. I think that they've been, to a certain degree, the unions have instructed them, like not even the local union, but the higher up unions have instructed them to take certain positions, and they should be protecting the people in their unions. And so that's that one vocal part, right? But on the ground, teachers are doing a great job overall. I've heard from so many parents and from my own children, seeing the teachers and having parents teacher conferences, and they're rising to the challenge. Teachers are very dedicated professionals, and you don't always get that sense when you're dealing with the union. Not that there's anything wrong with the union, but it's the people that are in the classroom that are doing the magic. And they're it's a rough year. We're going to get through it. And teachers have learned so much this year. It's like everyone's first year, but with the stakes being higher, because we're worried about health all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going well. The superintendent's in her first year, and I think people really like her. She's super smart. She's doing as well as she possibly can. We have 2 new principals. They seem to be doing well. So I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the teachers, and I'm really proud of the leadership.
Not to get too in the weeds, but I think a few weeks ago when there was an emergency school committee meeting, and it was deciding whether to go remote or not, or I'm sorry, it was deciding whether to appropriate the funding for that 1 week of testing.
Yep.
The vote itself wasn't to go remote or not. It was funny, I pegged you as sort of the swing vote in that. It sounded like you were it was a 4-3 vote. It sounded maybe throughout the meeting like you were leaning, maybe you were skeptical of appropriating the money, and you ended up giving the thumbs up at the very end. Talk about it's a big vote. I mean, I don't know that the schools go remote I don't know what happens if that vote goes down, but talk about kind of what went through your thought process at the end when you voted yes, and it ended up kind of being the difference, I thought.
So I didn't like, and I still don't like, that we don't have a firm plan. We don't have okay, this is what we're doing, and we're going to do it for the next 3 months or however much money we have to put towards it, right? I didn't like, for the community's sake, that it was a last minute decision. And there's backstory for that I'm not even really that privy to, because I wasn't in the meetings, but people were working on that for a while, right? So I have to respect, even if I don't like the process, you have to vote with what's in front of you. And for me, I knew, even though I didn't like the process, I wanted the teachers to be tested as well as the students, but more importantly, I wanted the teachers tested, because that's just, I've had that going on in my school now for a month and a half. So I'm that was an easy thing. The decision was really about, we still don't have as good a comprehensive plan as I wanted. So I was taking the opportunity to push on that, knowing that there were a lot of other things at play that I have no control over, right? So you just have to decide what the best thing is with your vote. And even though it wasn't pretty, wasn't the kind of process we want, because it wasn't it wasn't early enough, it wasn't comprehensive enough, but it's a pandemic.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think I sounded, and I think people were really frustrated in that meeting. And of course, we had over 30 people call in. We were getting barraged by the emails, and you have got to stick up for those parents, right? But just because you believe in what the parents are saying doesn't mean that that should be how you vote.
Mhm.
And I think that's the hardest thing for people to understand. People had absolutely every right to be mad at the superintendent for making a last minute decision, impacting people's lives and works and plans, and like, how am I going to get care for my kids next week? And they were all planning on going back. My kids were planning on going back that week. It stinks when you have to tell them, it's going to happen tonight, what might happen.
Mhm.
And people think it was our choice to go remote. It's not, it's the superintendent's. It's really important to understand that. Sometimes because this is all new, right? What we're doing right now in a pandemic is new, and I don't memorize the memorandums of understanding between the union and the school committee. Sometimes I don't know, and I have to be told. So, you have to make sure you understand the scope of your authority too, right? So.
Yeah. I certainly, hopefully people are clear that, hopefully they are if they read the stories or watch the meetings, but I know some things can get lost. The superintendent kind of has the authority just unilaterally, more or less right now, go between remote, hybrid, and in person. And I can attest, I think people were making some accusations. No one wants kids in school more than the superintendent, from my experience.
Right.
And I think that, and you guys are simply voting on the transfer of the funds for that 1 week of testing, the 4 days, which actually ended up being incredibly low positive test rate, which I think
Right.
might have put some people at ease, you would hope.
Yeah.
Going at doing this through Zoom, and is there anything that you'd like to see? I know there's been a lot of talk about, when we get back to normal, I mean, we want to keep up this accessibility. We want people to be able to call in maybe for public comment and stuff like that. Just so people don't have to go into City Hall just to kind of have their voices heard at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. What have you learned from this whole thing from like a more technical standpoint? What would you maybe like to see adopted going forward? I mean, I think a lot of people have taken some good things out of this whole nightmare. Have you taken anything good for the school committee out of this?
Sure. I think having as much participation that we have. I mean, you can, when we're on the WebEx platform during meetings, I can literally see who's on, so that's kind of fascinating. And I always knew that people watched. It's not like when we were all together in the chambers, I wasn't aware of the television screens and stuff, but it's very different. And I think also people calling in from their own home into the meeting is fascinating. I think so far we haven't had anyone go off the rails. Like, people have maintained a level of respect during a very stressful time that I really admire. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really proud to represent people in Melrose, because I think even when they're pissed, they don't do an insurrection, and that's pretty important.
Something you take for granted, I guess, maybe in this part of
we still have civility. We actually, in Massachusetts, we have moderate Republicans who are extremely thoughtful, kind of libertarian in terms of social rights. And I feel so fortunate personally to have grown up and lived in Massachusetts almost my entire life. And I feel so fortunate about how reasonable our conversations are, and people have every right to be upset this year, but they still get that we're not out to get them. We're not like, oh, well, they know that we're not making any money. So there's that piece. Like, you take them, this is a volunteer elected position. So it's funny. Did you ask me a question and I completely blew it off?
I'm already thinking of the next question once you start talking. So I think if I did. You kind of touched on it there. You touched on it a little bit beforehand when you said Melrose is really community based, but you live in Melrose. What makes doing this in Melrose so special? Like, what do you love about living in Melrose? Why is Melrose special to you? Why do you serve your time and your effort and your expertise, and you subject yourself to whatever, public input and all that stuff in Melrose? Why do you do that in Melrose?
Well, Chris Casatelli talked me into it, who was on the school committee for like 16 years. And she was like, I can't do it anymore. I want you to run. So I did. It was a little bit after Trump got in. So there was a little bit of like, if I'm ever going to do this, I'm going to do this. I've always loved politics my whole life. I'm a huge history buff. But so I love Melrose because Melrose is a beautiful little city. It's both small and large. It's close to Boston. Both Andrea, my wife, and I love, trees and woods. And so the fells have always, we've been in there ever since we lived in Melrose. We used to live on Pleasant Street. Now here's a fun fact. We live in the mayor's home, like the mayor where he grew up, not the mayor currently, but Rob Dolan's home where he grew up. We bought our house from his mom. So it's just a great neighborhood, and it's a great city. And Andrea was the one who gave birth to our two children, and she's been the more involved parent. So this has been my way to be more involved in the schools and lend my knowledge and expertise. And I think it's what's great about Melrose is that you can have lived in Melrose for 5 years or 3 generations, and very quickly you get the vibe and you get to know people. But it's also pretty sophisticated. It's not so small that people have no space from each other, or no exposure to other things. And not to be putting anyone down, but I think it's a great little city. And it's obviously, people have found out about it. When we first moved in 2006, it was still a secret. Not a secret anymore.
I have people like you to blame then for what I pay in rent. So that's really all I was hoping to kind of touch on. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say to all the people watching about really anything about the schools, about yourself, or whatever it might be.
I guess one thing is I'm a clinical social worker. So I've done, this type of work for 25 years. I work in a school, but I also have a teeny tiny private practice. I used to work in just that, in group private practice, but I went back to be part of a team in this school that I work in, and teams are really important to me. And one of the things I just have to say is, over the next couple of years, I hope as a community, Melrose keeps working on becoming more and more socially just and aware, and that our schools will actually figure out how to be more and more anti-racist. So that's something that I know the school committee will be talking about going forward.
Well, since you brought it up, is there anything that I know you guys have open meeting laws, and you can't really talk too much about where you're leaning on anything. I know that and for people watching too, I know that the Columbus Day issue on the calendar is coming up. I think members of the school committee are going to try to strike Columbus Day from the school calendar. And there's other issues that pop up since you brought up the social justice and in the school system. What would you like to see happen? Anything specific, or anything that you don't have to speak about the Columbus thing necessarily, but is there anything that you'd like to see actionably happen that isn't there yet?
So I would love it. I would love to eventually see some people of color on the school committee, and I would love to make sure that we do a phenomenal job at welcoming newcomers, whether they're ELL students or not, which is English language learner students or not. But just I think that we have this saying of one community open to all. And I think I think for the LGBT community, that is almost very broadly true. Speaking from my own experience in Melrose, people have been incredible. I think that just like the rest of our country, there's a big reckoning that we need to do around race, and anyone who's in any pocket of difference, and especially immigrants and people of color. So I just think I would love it to have. I'd love to have community conversations about it more and more and more. Like group reads, but also just I want our educators to feel safe and comfortable enough to be brave in their conversations with kids. And I just don't know. Well, I don't think we're there yet, not because this is not to blame anyone, because I think that this is how we've all been taught growing up, is our history gets whitewashed. And teachers don't get trained to how do you have brave conversations with kids? Like after the insurrection last week, how do you sit down with kids and have a conversation about that? And so I want our teachers to feel comfortable that even if some parents are uncertain about that they still do it. So that's what I hope for.
Yeah, I could imagine being a student these days for a number of reasons, including the topics that are brought up and what you're living through and seeing on social media every day. I couldn't imagine being a teacher either. It was hard enough after 9/11 going into school and hearing when you didn't really comprehend it all. I couldn't imagine trying to digest everything right now as a 13-year-old or a 17-year-old,
Yeah,
you know.
right.
Well, again, Razi-Thomas, school committee member, I appreciate it so much. You give me all this time and just kind of talking about what you do, what you'd like to see. I think it's really important for people to know what their elected officials are doing and what they're thinking. And I really appreciate it. So I just,
Oh, it's great to get to know you a little better, Mike. One of these days we'll have to watch a ball game together of some sort because now I know what's your favorite sport?
I'm a basketball guy, so I'm 6'4".
Oh,
You know, maybe people will stop yelling at me if they know I'm 6'4", and I can come and push them. But no, I can't. You know, I'm 6'4". I love basketball, and I've been dying this week because the Celtics have been postponed like 3 or 4 straight games here because of COVID. First world problems, but yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the great game of rugby.
all right. Well, I'll teach you about that. And Andrea, my wife, she still holds the all-time assist award for both women and men at Princeton basketball. So she played point for 4 years there. Yeah. So we're a big basketball family too.
Might have to extend the Zoom session here another 30 minutes. And bring Jenna,
You can turn off the tape and I'll talk about it.
Thanks so much, and I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. And thanks everyone for listening and watching. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.